Everyone, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Erin Ryan. I'm with Rycon Construction and the 2021 chapter president of the NAP Northern Ohio chapter. I'd like to thank our 2021 Gavel sponsors, our gold sponsors, are Cushman and Wakefield Cresco, Dollar Bank, PMC, RSM. Our silver sponsors are Cohen and Company, First American Commercial Title Insurance Company, First Federal Lakewood, Marsh & McClellan, Retzel, Walter Haverfield, Welty Development. Our bronze sponsors are Akron Cleveland Association of Realtors, Commercial Information Exchange, ATC, Bellwether Enterprises, Duffy and Duffy Cost Segregation, First Financial Bank Corp, Labella, M. Panzica Development, Marcus and Millichap, Onyx Creative, Pride One Construction, Rycon Construction, Sikora Law, Omni Title, and Thompson Hine. And our 2021 VIP advocacy sponsors, Cumberland Development, Ray Fogg Building Methods, Sikora Law. And now I would like to introduce Amy Whitaker from First American Commercial Title Insurance Company. She is the chair of the Strategic Initiative Committee. Thank you. Take it, Amy.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you. First, before we start off, before I introduce Michelle Jarbo, I really want to thank our committee members who put this event together. I've got a great team, and I think this is a fantastic program, which is very relevant, obviously, with what's going on. I'd like to thank Vince Adamas from Greater Cleveland Partnership, Erin Ryan from Rycon, and Mike Dostals from CBIC. Just let you know too, if you have questions, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen to put in your questions. And with that, I'd like to introduce Michelle Jarbo. Michelle writes about real estate, economic development, and other topics for Crain's Cleveland business. She moved to Northeast Ohio in 2007 and covered real estate for the Plain Dealer for more than a decade. A past president of the National Association of Real Estate Editors, she holds a graduate certificate in the urban real estate development and finance from Cleveland State. And with that, I'd like to welcome Michelle Jarbo.
Thanks, Amy. I'm glad to be here moderating the program today. I'm going to introduce our panelists and then we'll jump right in. So I'll start with Frank LaRose. He took office as Ohio's 51st Secretary of State in January of 2019. LaRose, who grew up in Northeast Ohio, oversees both the state's election process and the department that gives businesses the green light to operate in Ohio. He is also a member of the Ohio Redistricting Commission. Marty McGann is Executive Vice President of Advocacy and Strategy for the Greater Cleveland Partnership. He's responsible for developing and advancing the Chamber's public policy agenda. Since joining GCP in 2011, he's successfully pushed to bring money to Northeast Ohio through the state capital budget bill and has pursued funding for everything from education reform to the Opportunity Corridor project on Cleveland's east side. Ned Hill is a professor of economic development at the Ohio State University's John Glenn College of Public Affairs. He's also a senior research associate in the College of Engineering's Ohio Manufacturing Institute. And he spent 3 decades as a faculty member at the Maxine Goodman Levin College of Urban Affairs at Cleveland State University, where he served as dean from 2007 to 2015. And then our fourth panelist, who we are still waiting on, is William Gary. He's Cuyahoga Community College's Executive Vice President of Workforce, Community, and Economic Development. He's the inaugural chairman of the recently formed Ohio Workforce League, which advises the state on workforce development policies, programs, and priorities. His broad background includes work in aviation, telecommunications, manufacturing, and healthcare. We're going to have a group discussion and then we'll shift to audience questions partway through the program. I should note that Secretary LaRose has to leave us just before 1 p.m. for an urgent meeting. So if you have specific questions for him, please submit them early using the Q&A box. And for all audience members, you can submit questions throughout the program in the Q&A box, and then we will pick those up later on. Please put them in the Q&A area, not the chat. Setting the stage here, the results of the 2020 census released earlier this year show that Ohio is adding population, but at a slower rate than many other states. That means Ohio is set to lose one of its 15 seats in Congress, continuing a decades-long decline in representation. Cleveland, meanwhile, still is losing residents, so the pace of the decline has slowed. The loss of people and political power can curb access to federal funding for everything from education to housing to infrastructure. Those are huge challenges for a region already struggling to compete for businesses and talent. So to get us started, I'll put this question to each of the panelists. How much clout is Northeast Ohio losing and why? And I'll throw this to Ned first.
Well, thank you, Michelle, and I appreciate people giving us their lunch hour to listen to us talk about, well, not politics, but about congressional power. There are two things to look at what's happening with our congressional representation. The first is losing a seat's going to hurt. And most people who are close to the process believe it's Tim Ryan's seat has the highest probability of disappearing. So it may mean that the loss of representation comes directly out of Northeast Ohio. The second thing that's happened is that with Congresswoman Fudge now being Secretary Fudge, we've got an open seat right now, and whoever replaces her in that election is going to have low seniority. And I think the third thing is that Northeast Ohio, if you have a broad enough lens, look down towards Holmes County and go as far as Stark County and maybe all the way over to Columbiana, has always had a tradition of pragmatic, bipartisan representation in Congress, not on the constituent things, but on the really big issues that matter. And so my fear is, as the two parties get split and become more ideological, I'm very concerned of what happens to that pragmatic problem-solving streak that's been part of Ohio politics.
Marty?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with folks today. And I'll echo some of Ned's points. I mean, one seat out of 435 isn't a lot, but when you look at that trend line that you mentioned, Michelle, is really when you start to have the problem. And when you look at some of the contiguous states to ours, you realize that it's the Great Lakes region that has really been losing these seats over time. And I think when you look at the agenda that we share across a number of those locations, it's that agenda which I think suffers. You've got the growth in the eastern portion and western portion of the country, and I think the issues that matter to the heartland can get pushed to the side if we're not careful. So losing one seat isn't that big of a deal, but I think it just represents this trend over time that has seen us have less congressional influence. You can make that up when you have folks like Marcy Kaptur as one of the highest ranking officials in the U.S. Congress, but we're losing some of that over time also, as Ned noted, with some of the seniority issues. So looking forward to this discussion, glad to be a part of it, and we'll move right along to the next.
Secretary LaRose, I'm hoping you can weigh in and maybe take us through, a brief description of how we got here with the census process.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you know, the census occurs every 10 years. One of the big challenges was that this year that census data came to us 5 months late as it relates to the redistricting process. Now, some people have minimized that and said, well, does that really make a difference? It absolutely does. The redistricting process can't even begin in earnest until we have that census data, because we need to know where people are, where they've moved to. As we've discussed already a little bit here, Northeast Ohio is the focus of this conversation. And well, the region has not grown as fast as other regions. I also think it's important that we point out some of the changing political patterns. And as others have mentioned, if you look to the east in the Mahoning Valley, for example, you've got a scenario now where areas that had traditionally been solidly Democratic are trending more Republican. You're seeing a real energy in sort of conservative circles in the Mahoning Valley area, and it's interesting that was really just a few years ago a place that Republicans didn't even bother going, and now you're seeing Republican victories in that part of the state. So as much as the patterns have changed, it's also key to mention that we are losing one seat, as others have mentioned. We're going from 16 down to 15. And it's not because Ohio has lost population. It's because, as was mentioned also, Ohio has not gained it as quickly as other states, particularly some of those states in the southern part of the country. And so that'll make for a even more challenging redistricting process than it would normally be because of that loss of one seat. So look forward to the conversation. As a proud Northeast Ohioan, this is one that is near and dear to my heart. My family and I moved to Columbus a year ago, but Northeast Ohio has and always will be home for me.
So I wonder, how much do all of you expect the loss of political representation and power to impact our ability to attract and retain businesses? Because we're talking to a real estate crowd here, and some of our audience members may be landlords or involved with site selection related to attracting businesses or helping them grow.
Yeah,
Throwing
I'll take
that
a swing.
open.
Yeah, I'll take a swing first, Michelle. We're our efforts at the Greater Cleveland Partnership to attract and retain businesses. Again, we're the Chamber of Commerce in town here. Our work in that space will continue. We believe that we do have sort of robust infrastructure around us and a lot of assets to build upon in our community, and a lot of factors that really play in our favor. I think what we'll see here is just a little bit less money than we would have had otherwise in some key program areas that really is the problem. I mean, you've got formulaic funding coming out of the federal government around transportation, around health and human services, around HUD. On a going forward basis, we will see less in certain pockets of areas and in certain funding streams, upward of a couple hundred programs of the federal government that will have less money as a result. So we're still going to do the work to build our community and to attract businesses to our community. I think it's just on a going forward, it's how much infrastructure money will we get from the bipartisan infrastructure proposal? How much money will come from standard transportation bills? Different formulaic funding components will be less, and then sort of the flow through down to local government will be less. But I'm confident in what we've been able to do as a community and our ability to collaborate among a lot of different partners. And so we'll still do the work and we'll still be successful at attracting and retaining businesses. It's just going to mean, a little bit of money missing that we otherwise could have had.
Michelle, I look at it in there are two buckets. The formulaic bucket, which Marty's talking about, will be a problem because that population is part of the formula, but so is old housing stock and other things. So, but there'll be some decline there. I'm actually much more concerned about the loss of seniority and the increasing inability of the Ohio delegation to work together, which I think is going to get worse, because what the federal money's been really helpful for isn't necessarily the cash that gets involved with an immediate transaction. That's on us within the state. And thanks to Jobs Ohio, I think we're in pretty good shape that way. It really is kind of the long-term infrastructure investments, the money you need to kind of replace water and sewer lines. That is a real challenge. And when it comes to the construction industry, I also have a very big concern about the ability of our communities and counties to reinvest in each other, because most of the big urban counties are bonded so heavily and so committed on storm and sewer water line separation. Many of them are bumping up against the bond cap. So I think that, again, longer term strategic stuff, there's going to be a problem. Short-term transactional work, I don't see a problem. And I think as a community, we also have to figure out how to make it easier for our urban counties and municipalities to be able to invest in their own future.
Let's also talk about workforce. There's this, chicken and egg question of does business follow workforce or does workforce follow business? Of course, the answer is both. I think there had been a pattern in the last century where people moved to where the jobs are, but I think that more and more you're seeing businesses moving to where the people are, where the talent is. And I think that we have challenges and opportunities as it relates to this. We have a great set of universities in Ohio and in Northeast Ohio. The challenge is, how are we keeping those highly trained young Ohioans there after they've earned their degrees? This is one of the reasons why I ran for office in the first place 10 years ago when I first ran for the state Senate. I got out of the Army and came home and found that a lot of the guys and gals I'd grown up with and gone to high school with were pursuing their careers now in places like Chicago and New York and Atlanta and Nashville and all over the country. And I thought, we need to work to keep, not only to attract people, but to keep our talented people right here in Northeast Ohio. There is what I call a Northeast Ohio diaspora, and you'll find a lot of them down here in Columbus. You can see that in even things like, there are more Browns fans than Bengals fans in Columbus, even though Columbus is closer to Cincinnati. So, I mean, it's just, we need to work on how we keep people in town after they get their education there.
So from the state's perspective, what sort of strategies are being employed to keep people here and attract people?
Let me start with that. I mean, I think one of them is investment. And as was mentioned in Marty's introduction, the state has invested in those quality of life kind of things in Northeast Ohio that matter. We're talking about arts and cultural institutions, the kind of things that attract people and keep people in a community. That's a big part of it. I also think that, and this is a creative idea, and this doesn't have to do with keeping folks here that grew up here, but to attract people here. We've got a lot of foreign talent that comes to get their education. I think of right there in University Circle, for example, a lot of great examples of people from all over the world are coming there to get their education. Unfortunately, we give them a degree, and because of the incoherent federal immigration policy, they're told, all right, now your student visa's up, so head home. What we ought to be able to do is staple a work visa to their to their graduation certificate and keep them here in Ohio. There's some creative ideas for how to do that. The state of Massachusetts had one. I drafted it up as a piece of legislation that would essentially extend a student visa indefinitely by keeping them affiliated with the university so they could begin their careers here. But those are just some of the things that need to be looked at, both at the state and federal level.
Yeah, I'll jump on that one, Michelle, also with then Senator LaRose. I remember working with your office a little bit on that back in the day, Senator. We've talked a good amount about the value of immigration in our community, and half of the growth in the Great Lakes region, as we found through some of our work with partners, half of the population growth that we have experienced has been immigrant foreign-born individuals. So we would have less political clout, we would have less resources, but for the involvement in the welcoming community that we have and the policies that we have in place to ensure that immigrants have a place here in our community. So it's, for us, that is an important component of a talent strategy, is ensuring that that we also are mindful of that and realize that as a population growth issue. As the secretary said, with respect to appealing community, I mean, that's what I was talking about earlier. We have the building blocks in place that the next generation wants, and we continue to invest in those. From a talent standpoint, if we have a good education system and amenities that people want to be around, we feel like it's a good formula to position us well for the business retention and expansion opportunities.
So I'd like to bring in another factor in all this. I'm a fan and of everything the Secretary and Marty said about when it came to immigrants migration. This is a state that's built on the backs of immigrants. And we should recognize that the positive contribution that's there. But I think there are two other things which Northeast Ohio can do in partnership with the state. The first is, and I hear this, actually, Marty's team and Team Neo mentioned this several times, they're having real difficulty getting people in Northeast Ohio and people in Central Ohio to realize that Ohio State is the state's university. It's not Central Ohio's university. And I think that the diaspora that the Secretary is talking about is probably within a quarter mile of where I'm currently sitting. And so I think getting more Northeast Ohio and Ohio State's Board of Trustees would be helpful. I also think that talent and recruiting trips because networks fray when kids are down here to get internships back up in Northeast Ohio. I am glad that Kroger's is now stocking Great Lakes beer, so I feel I'm at home whenever I go to the grocery store. I'm waiting for the oatmeal stout, just saying. But the other thing is, when you look at where we're losing population in the state, yes, the city of Cleveland is losing population, and there are issues there to be fixed. But if you look at what used to be called the factory towns, the courthouse square towns, Lorraine, Elyria, scattered throughout Northeast Ohio, the inability of those communities to take derelict buildings and getting rid of them or fixing them up, that's a sign of risk. And finding a way that we can essentially revitalize all of Northeast Ohio, I would say all parts of the state as much as possible, but dealing on those towns that were vibrant in 1890 to 1940 that have weakened. And right now, the growth that in repositioning population that's important to the state has essentially been the suburbs of the 3 Cs. And I think that one of the things I've really applauded the Greater Cleveland Partnership for is taking a regional view on a lot of these things. But it's those, go out to the Mahoning Valley. I think part of what's there is that people feel like the anger is they're left behind, they don't count, no one wants to invest in them anymore.
Hey, let me add something else too, if I may. And Professor, you got into this a little bit, talking about the population shifting that has happened in Northeast Ohio from some of the cities out to the suburbs. In some ways, we need to right-size local government too, and this is a challenging and painful proposition, right? I mean, if you look at, for example, the school district in the city of Cleveland, it is built for a city of several 100,000 people more than what it is. And there's a lot of infrastructure. There's a lot of sort of legacy stuff there that has to be dealt with. The fact that we've got derelict buildings that probably need to come down, and people just need to sort of come to accept the fact that there's going to be areas where there had been buildings built that are going to be grassy fields for the time being. And those are kind of some of the challenges. All the different units of government that we have in Northeast Ohio offer great local control, but they also bring in some sort of structural inefficiency that comes with that, and sort of acting and thinking more regional is something that I've always been a fan of. And listen, I used to be an economic development director for the city of Brecksville, and so I understand how important it is to do that sort of local economic development work. But the fact is that we in government are often too parochial about this stuff. Most people don't necessarily think of, I live in this city or I live in this village. They think of themselves as part of Northeast Ohio. We may go to church over here. We may send our kids over there. Our work may be someplace else. Those sort of lines on the ground that government creates are a little bit arbitrary to the average person. They sort of think of themselves as Northeast Ohioans more than I live in this village or identify with this city or township. And one of the other things that I think that we need to work on in Northeast Ohio is getting our swagger back a little bit. I think that there are a lot of things that we should be rightfully proud of and brag about. I think sometimes we have a little bit of Midwestern humility that we need to get over, and we need to brag about really the good quality of life that we have. Northeast Ohio offers a great balance. And what I mean by that is you've got a lot of the amenities that you wouldn't find in smaller towns. And you've also got the convenience of not having to live in a place like New York or LA, where the cost of living is ridiculous, where the traffic is ridiculous. We've also got sort of the good things though in life that we can offer here in Northeast Ohio.
So now we just need to sell people on that a little more. William, welcome.
Thank you, and I apologize for being late. We at Cuyahoga Community College were hosting the Deputy Secretary of Commerce, Deputy Secretary Don Graves, who held a roundtable discussion with key business leaders, and the president of the college and I were hosting that. So I apologize for being late. We just concluded that meeting.
Well, it's very good to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm going to go back to something Marty alluded to earlier. You mentioned that, many of the other states that are losing congressional seats are our neighbors. So what can we do as a region to advocate more effectively at the federal level, whether it's through the Great Lakes Metro Chambers or other avenues?
Yeah, the Great Lakes Metro Chamber Coalition is a partnership that we formed about 10 years ago in the immediate aftermath of the last census. And it was a partnership between us and some of the other key chambers of commerce across the Great Lakes region, principally Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Buffalo. And then a number of other chambers sort of signed up for it. We all collectively realized we were all losing a seat or two. Ohio lost 2 back then. And that if we worked together, we could arrive at a strategy to really elevate ourselves and not think of ourselves so parochial as just Ohio. So we really came up with a broad agenda around talent attraction, workforce, infrastructure, public transit, trade, et cetera, and really have jointly advocated on behalf of businesses across the Great Lakes region. We've seen some success with that. I think there's more opportunity to partner more broadly, especially in an era when presidential elections are predominantly won in the Great Lakes region, or at least historically have been, and that use the influence that we have to really speak with one voice on behalf of a number of policy issues. So we've seen some successes in that, but again, I think there's more opportunity for deeper partnership across some of these state lines. I know Secretary LaRose talked a little bit about the lines that we have in our local communities, and they don't really mean much to the average person. But similarly, the issues between the western part of the state of Ohio and the southern part of the state of Michigan can be pretty comparable. So we think there's a lot of opportunity for policy in that area.
And Michelle, one of the way of dealing with, take a step back. I think there's very little we can do to suddenly change a 50-year population dynamic. The state has been growing population, and I think we can still do a better job, and that's going to be done through the opportunity side and looking at migrants, and also the diaspora, getting them home. But when it comes to Congress, I think that the emphasis has to shift much more on the importance of seniority and power in Congress on the part of both parties, and encouraging pragmatic politics, at least when it comes to investing in and building a region.
I'm going to go back to workforce development for a moment because the topic came up before William joined us. And William, one thing we talked about was in an environment of diminishing population and at least in the Cleveland area and reduced political clout, what can we do better to attract and retain businesses, including hone our workforce development strategies? So I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about what our priorities should be.
Well, thank you for that question. This is an issue and a subject that obviously we deal with on a daily basis. At Tri-C, for an example, we have aligned all of our programming to address the needs of those industry sectors that we believe are driving our economy. I think one of the key ingredients to that is to do this from a sector perspective, a sector partnership perspective, as opposed to each participating organization in that sector competing for talent, driving up salaries, robbing Peter to pay Paul, if you will. I also think that from that sector partnership, we need to begin thinking about the long term, not just the immediacy of filling jobs, but the long-term efficacy of creating long-term talent pipelines, starting, quite frankly, from the 4th grade. And so I've been here now 7 years in the Cleveland area, never been here before. And one of the things that I've seen grow is this whole aspect of collaboration, of business collaboration with 4-year institutions and 2-year institutions, so that we're all saying the same message and coming together to create common solutions to address the skills gap situation. So that's our strategy from a workforce development standpoint, working with community-based organizations, asking the business community to serve on our advisory boards, we have actually set and established a board of visitors, which is a board equal to our board of trustees and our foundation board. And those are the kinds of activities that I think will advance this whole regional approach to workforce development.
Obviously, Northeast Ohio has relied on federal funding to tackle major projects, from the Euclid Corridor makeover that wrapped up in 2008 to the Towpath Trail, which is almost finished. And we have a lot of ambitious proposals on the drawing board, including a $250 million bridge to the lakefront and the remaking of the whole hillside area behind Tower City. How do you expect changes in Congress to impact our ability to earmark or otherwise attract federal funds for big ticket projects like that?
Are you addressing that to me?
No, I'm addressing that to the group. Sorry, I should have said that.
Okay, that's okay.
Whoever wants to jump in and take a crack at it.
Yeah, I think Professor Hill made a good point when he talked about the importance of seniority. And, we've had historically some senior and well-respected members of Congress on both sides of the aisle from our region. And that's, not necessarily the case today. Those federal funding streams come through a variety of different ways. It's not necessarily an area of expertise for me as someone who serves in state government, but two that I know that have been particularly impactful is GLRI, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, and also just all the variety of federal transportation funds. I served as the transportation chairman in the state Senate. And I mean, we think of the late, great Congressman LaTourette, who was such a leader in transportation funding issues and one of those sort of rare moderate voices in modern politics. But he was able to make a big difference and brought a lot of transportation funding home to Northeast Ohio. And so it's important that we have members of Congress that can rise up in the ranks and be from Northeast Ohio, and that will make a difference when it comes to those kind of funding streams.
Yeah, I completely agree with the Secretary of State. This is a big issue for our community, probably as big as the issue of losing a member of Congress. I mean, from our perspective, a lot of these big projects take bipartisanship. And they take the Euclid Corridor project doesn't get done without Congressman LaTourette and Congresswoman Tubbs Jones at the time. The GLRI work that the Secretary mentioned, without Dave Joyce and Marcy Kaptur both working on that, both appropriators pushing it. I mean, that is our biggest successes have been because we've had broad support across the political spectrum. Even NASA. I mean, we talk a lot about NASA within our organization. Their budget went from going down to going up, and it was a result of Senator Portman and largely Senator Brown, the two of them working closely together to restore that. And now, we're 50% up from where we were 4 or 5 years ago. I mean, these are the successes that we have when folks collaborate across party lines and grow in seniority over time. And we're going to need to continue that in our community as we fill some pretty big seats, as we fill Senator Portman's seat, as we fill Marcia Fudge's seat, as we fill Congressman Gonzalez's seat. I mean, we're making some pretty big decisions for our community right now, aside from the obvious of the mayor's race, that will help shape our community over the course of the next decade.
And Marty, you brought up the delegation itself. There are either 6 or 7 members that represent Northeast Ohio directly or indirectly. It's kind of that Johnson seat that goes from Marietta to Columbiana County. I don't know how we can even drive that one. But the point is that of the 6 that are directly in our footprint, 3 of those seats are empty or will be empty. And that affects bipartisanship, and it affects seniority. So Marcia Fudge's seat is going to have a freshman. Gonzalez's seat is going to have a freshman. And we don't know if Tim Ryan's seat is going to survive, but if it does, he's running for Senate. So there's some real concern there. The other concern that I had, Secretary LaRose, I'm not lobbying you, so that's okay. You put your fingers in your ears, what I'm going to say now, is that when we had the 2000 map, we had large parts of the state that didn't wake up every day thinking about Northeast Ohio. You had 4 districts in Summit County. None of them woke up and said, I need a Swenson's burger to make it through the day. Marcy Kaptur, I think, has done great things for Northeast Ohio, but she doesn't wake up thinking about Mitchell's ice cream. There's someone closer to Toledo. You know, she does a Tony Paco's hot dog instead. And Tim Ryan didn't wake up every morning and read Crane's Cleveland Business or the Plain Dealer. He was still trying to find the Vindicator on his doorstep. So it's the fact that with the last two sets of redistricting, the notion of representing regional economies disappeared, and it's not in the rules. And you know, we would all love to see in a perfect world a nested set of representation from state house districts to Senate districts to congressional districts that represent our regions, rather than being sliced and diced. So, you know, we have the Lake Erie water snake, we've got the angry duck, and we have a cascading set of toilet seats that go from Northeast Ohio down to Columbus. They don't represent things that make sense. All right, I'm going to take my Thorazine, and you can take your fingers out of your ears now, Secretary LaRose. Very good.
Hey, actually, let me talk about redistricting though for a second, because there's a good news story here, and that is that we've got a new set of rules for how to do this. The challenge is, and this is something that I've been very focused on as a member of the redistricting commission, the challenge is that we have to be able to get Republicans and Democrats to work together to reach those 10-year maps. Now, that has been the spirit of compromise that I've brought to the table from the very beginning, but there are 6 other members of the redistricting commission. And so I need to be able to get several of my colleagues that serve on that commission to also be interested in that art of compromise that is necessary for statesmen and women to solve problems, right? Either way, though, with the new rules, the kind of elongated districts that you talked about are impossible to draw. You can't stretch districts out the way they had been in the past quite as much, because you have to keep more counties together. So you really have to build districts using the building blocks of existing entities of government. Cities can't be split, for example, unless they exceed the population threshold for a single district. And so I think when you see the new congressional districts, whether we can get a 10-year bipartisan map or whether it unfortunately ends up as a 4-year partisan map, either way, I think you're going to see much more compact districts. I will caution, though, that the geographic or even sort of how pretty the districts look in shape is not a great way to judge the worth of a district. It is important, however, that you maintain those communities of interest, that you keep them reasonably compact, that you create opportunities for majority minority districts where that is possible. You talk about the Johnson district. Well, if you look at that collection of counties that he represents, they are culturally quite similar. And so although it sort of stretches along the Ohio River and becomes geographically kind of a big district, they are culturally quite similar. And so it does make sense for one member to represent those counties.
Yeah, I just thought I have, and I'll stop at this point, is whoever drew Jim Jordan's district must have had an ironic sense of humor having him represent Oberlin.
Well, that was the old district. We'll see what the new ones look like for sure.
All good. Thank you so much. I didn't want to put you on the spot, but it's but you are absolutely right about Johnson's district. Culturally, it is a very coherent district.
Well, and let me be clear about something. We're on the clock, and you may have seen this that was reported just a couple of days ago. I've been emailing my colleagues on the commission. We've got 2 co-chairs. It's Speaker Cupp and Senator Sykes, and I've been asking those co-chairs to schedule meetings. We've got work to do, and this is really hard. To get Republicans and Democrats to find the middle ground on this is not easy. But if we don't get started soon, the clock's going to run out, and that's why I'm urgently asking the co-chairs of the commission, of our redistricting commission, to hold meetings, because we've got work to do. And by the way, I don't necessarily mean the travel around the state and hear hours and hours of the same public testimony. I understand the value of that, but we need to sit down as members of the commission and find that middle ground and start hammering out compromises and finding ways that we could do that.
Thank you for doing that.
Oh, sorry, Ned. I just, I was going to switch gears a little bit and ask, though we are losing congressional representation, we do have a Northeast Ohioan in the president's cabinet. So I wonder how much of an impact it has that Marcia Fudge was elevated to HUD secretary. How much does that help us in our attempts to make our case for housing support and other assistance, both in Northeast Ohio and throughout Ohio?
Yeah, I'll take a swing at that first. I think it's huge. Congresswoman Fudge has been a good partner of ours during her tenure in Congress. Having her at that role at this time, having literally a seat at the table, is really meaningful. And we've been in communication with her office for issues within her agency, but outside of that also, and can help be a great resource for us to sort of directing to other aspects of the administration. So for us, it is really great. It's great for our community to have Secretary Fudge in that role. But beyond that, as William talked about, and as we had a meeting that was referenced also, I mean, having Deputy Secretary Graves at Commerce in a moment of big economic turmoil and change with COVID and new tools and new investments coming out, having him there is a really big deal. Also, and I know I mentioned NASA earlier, Jim Free, the former center director for NASA Glenn, being one of the top officials now, just in the last couple of weeks, named to essentially run NASA's Artemis program and beyond, is exciting for an agency that is really meaningful to Northeast Ohio, to have an Ohioan, a native-born Ohioan who knows our district, to be sitting in that chair. And then beyond that, just the political folks. I mean, to have Senator Brown, chairman of banking, to have both of our senators on the Senate Finance Committee, to have Dave Joyce, Marcy Kapler on appropriations. We may not have had the influence that we had in the good old days of Chairman Ralph Regula and Chairman Dave Hobson in the Appropriations Committee, doing great work for their districts and beyond. But we've been growing this. We've lost some people over time, as Ned mentioned, in terms of cycling through some seats, but we keep putting people in. We keep getting some pretty good committee positions and growing our influence over time. So I think it's great to have Secretary Fudge where she's at, but beyond that, we've got sort of good relationships and people placed in the right spots beyond that.
Michelle, I'd like to echo Marty's comments. Again, we had the privilege of having Deputy Secretary Graves join us today, along with a roundtable discussion of key business leaders to talk about some of the challenges and issues that Northeast Ohio, specifically Cleveland, face. And with Secretary Graves, who I'm sure a lot of us have known for years, he gets it. He understands the political, the economic, the workforce, the social aspects of growing our economy and the importance of how redistricting is going to impact that if we don't get it right. Even when we talked about the opportunity that this region has with our ports, the fact that domestically, we're getting a lot of activity from domestic port activity, but European port activity is tremendously down. And so he gets and understands how the administration should address that. And I think we have an opportunity not only with Congresswoman Fudge, but with Deputy Secretary Graves to address some of these issues that may have an impact on this whole issue of redistricting in Ohio.
It's a great thing that we've got Secretary Fudge at HUD. Of course, we're, as you know, running a congressional special election right now, and early voting has already begun. So let me make that pitch. Now's the time to participate in early voting, or consider requesting your absentee ballot at voteohio.gov. As much as it's great that we've got Secretary Fudge serving at HUD, this is two administrations in a row, because remember that we had Robert Lighthizer in the Trump administration, who is a native Northeast Ohioan as well, who was serving in that capacity as the trade representative. And so we're a region that does punch above our weight when it comes to placing senior people into the federal government. And that's something that we should be proud of in Northeast Ohio, but it also comes from that kind of collaboration. One of the things that our region is noted for is collaboration, and not just among various sectors, such as the public and private and nonprofit sectors, but also when it comes to political pragmatism. And unfortunately, that's become too rare these days. There's this sense among some that compromise is a failure. That's fallacy. That's nonsense. It's compromise is how statesmen and women solve problems in a democracy. That means Republicans and Democrats actually working together. We've lost that in recent years, and we need to get back to that. That's the kind of leadership that Northeast Ohio is known for, and we should expect that from our elected leaders as well.
I wonder what funding streams or programs, I mean, Marty and Ned both alluded earlier to sort of the math, the calculations that may impact funding for things from housing to healthcare. I wonder what funding streams or programs you or your organizations are particularly concerned about as you're looking at the math related to population loss and the results of the census.
Well, my concern is, because it reflects what I've been working on, is the vitalization of America's manufacturing base. And Northeast Ohio is particularly well positioned. The digital task force that's been working in Northeast Ohio is doing really good work. I saw that Timken is opening up a lab at the University of Akron. Case Western Reserve has been increasing its investment in the robotics area. But one of the ways in which the United States as a whole is going to have to respond to this labor shortage, it's all about upskilling, and it's all about increasing productivity. And productivity is the value of the product for every hour worked. We need higher valued products. And I think Williams' future is awful bright, because no one is ever going to be able to stop learning in this environment, particularly when you're dealing with manufacturing. So we're going to see plants smaller in headcount, much more productive. And whatever region gets this thing right, combine that with the fact that we've got a really boring climate in Northeast Ohio, no earthquakes, no floods, no hurricanes, well, some floods, no hurricanes. It's going to change locational calculus. But the emphasis from here on out is on productivity. Ohio did a great thing back in the 2000s, changing our business tax structure so we weren't putting a barrier in front of capital investment. We need to keep the CAT tax whole and not broken down. And we need to have a productivity conversation around here, not one that says, oh, we're going to lay people off. No, we need a productivity conversation that says you need the skills so that you can make more money for you and your company.
I would support and agree with Ed or Edward. When we talk about funding and population loss, one thing COVID taught us in the community college arena and the workforce development arena is that people now have choices, particularly with respect to remote learning and training. And we have an issue in this state where workforce development training presented by community colleges is a self-sustaining operation. So when I say that, we need funding support not only to create new programming, to create better access so that we can scale the talent pipeline. And in the legislation, you have the Portman-Kane bill that is called the Jobs Act that advocates Pell Grant eligibility for workforce development programming. That legislation is not advancing as fast as we'd like to see it, but the President's America's Act or Jobs Act can incorporate that particular legislation so that workforce development can be advanced. We can create better access in the talent pool and hopefully create better productivity advances in advanced manufacturing so that employers now can be engaged in addressing this talent pipeline as well.
I'm going to put a call out again to audience members. If anybody wants to submit a question, please do in the Q&A box.
Yeah, Michelle, to your earlier question, I mean, I think there's a lot of programs on a formulaic basis that will receive less comparatively as a result of losing some of that influence going forward. A couple of programs, as you start to talk about K-12 education, when you talk about community development block grant funding, when you talk a little bit about what William was talking about with workforce, these are areas where the dollars are flowing through other intermediaries, other public sector entities. And those are areas that beyond what we've already mentioned are particularly concerning, just as those are some areas where we really need the funding and that, help revitalize our community. Again, some of this is weighted for areas with the most need, as we've seen even with the recent funding, the state and local funding that came out from the American Rescue Plan dollars. We received disproportionately more because we've had more challenge than other communities. So there is some weighting in some of these programs, but those are just a few areas where I'm particularly concerned.
While I was preparing for this panel, I asked a couple of my colleagues if they had questions they would want to ask you. And actually, NASA Glenn came up. A couple of you have mentioned NASA. So there was a question about, with diminishing political power and with the loss of seniority, should we have any concerns about the future of NASA?
I don't have concerns about the future of NASA. I feel like we're finally playing offense. From my vantage point, I feel like we spent a decade, maybe several decades, playing defense on NASA. And in the last 5 years or so, I feel like we've kind of flipped the script a little bit. NASA is central to just about everything that happens in the Artemis program and the desire to go back to the moon and to eventually go to Mars. You can't get there without the communications expertise they have, the propulsion expertise, their biomedical expertise. They are, for lack of a better word, kind of in the driver's seat on a lot of this. And I know there's always big centers that, have a history and have a celebrated national history, and they're entitled to that. But I feel like we're very well positioned on a going forward basis to do great things at NASA and beyond. I mean, as some of these assets even, turn more towards typical defense type operations. So I think we're in a really strong position in my vantage point. Again, our two senators and our members of Congress stepped up when we've had risks in the past, but I feel like our trend line has been pretty positive, and I hope it'll continue so.
Hey, Marty, I'm curious, with the private space companies at work, is Plumbrook getting more work out of that?
My sense is Plumbrook is getting a good amount of work out of the private. We don't get access to all that, Ned, but my sense is that they've remained pretty busy.
Oh, that's good to hear.
So
And
then
thanks for bringing
another,
up Plumbrook, because between NASA Glenn and Plumbrook, which I think they now call the Armstrong Test Facility, it's really a unique set of facilities that you don't have anywhere else in the country, all right here in one place. And I think that when you kind of market the two together, it shows that Northeast Ohio really is a hub for that kind of research.
Yeah, and I see.
we should probably.
I see real quick. Plumbrook is. Forgive me for not having the acreage right, several thousand acres of property out in Sandusky that is owned by NASA Glenn. It was just renamed, per the Secretary of State's mention a moment ago. It was renamed from Plumbrook Station to Armstrong Test Facility a number of months ago, but it reports up under NASA Glenn. So NASA Glenn's leadership is responsible for the Armstrong Test Facility, and it's a key component. You test big engine pieces. They've got just a lot of sort of irreplaceable equipment and testing capabilities out there that are used by obviously the federal government beyond to test equipment.
So what can we do to make sure we're not having the same conversation 10 years from now?
Well, in terms of the sheer demographics, we're going to have it. But in terms of the outcomes and the impacts, we should try to bend that conversation. So we're really talking about productivity. We're talking about the way that we can work with congressional delegations across state lines, the way in which the pragmatic the pragmatic way that we approach partisan politics doesn't disappear. And I think that's the business community plays a very important role in that.
I, for one, don't accept the notion that we're going to lag behind the rest of the nation when it comes to population growth. I think that we need to set that as a target. We need to be purposeful about growing our populations. I think that there are a variety of things that we need to get right in order to do that. It's infrastructure investment, it's arts and cultural investment, but it's also making sure that as we compare to other states, that we have a pro-growth, pro-business environment where people want to come and set up shop and want to do business. And so, if we work hard and get those things right, I think that we've got a lot to offer. I don't want to hear people use the winter excuse anymore. I get it. It's snowy in January, February, and March, but what the heck? Northeast Ohio is a great place to live. And if you can get through those 3 months, then I think we've got one of the best climates anywhere. And as Ned mentioned, we don't have the kind of natural disasters that other parts of the country are plagued by. We also have one of the world's greatest sources of fresh water just to our north that we take for granted sometimes. Ohio has a lot of, it's the old, I think it was Governor Rhodes that said Ohio has more by accident than most states have on purpose. We need to market those things, and we need to make sure that people know that Ohio is a great place to live, work, and raise a family.
We have an audience question about what the state is doing to drive development into urban centers. The audience member says it seems like many Jobs Ohio programs could be interpreted as agents of sprawl because of focusing funding on suburban or greenfield development. Is there anything that we could do better to attract businesses closer to urban talent hubs?
I'll jump in there just for a moment. And, we were part of the group of folks that really advocated for the creation of Jobs Ohio 10 years ago, and think it's a unique tool that we need to preserve and maintain, and think it has done a remarkable job, and frankly positions us for success in ways that other states can't, because they have different processes and different approaches to economic development. For us, we've been a big fan. Part of that is, they have invested in a lot of projects in our urban center. Frankly, they've been criticized for investing occasionally too much in urban centers, and have been instrumental in retaining key companies. I can name a number, off the top of my head, including Sherwin-Williams. They were a big player in the Sherwin-Williams arrangement, but also, the work that they've been doing of late on forming innovation districts, the Cleveland Innovation District, with a partnership between the Cleveland Clinic, CASE, UH, CSU, Metro Health. Those things don't happen on accident, and if done correctly, those are the types of things that can position us for the next 10 to 15 years of success. The way to get out of the challenges is that we've had is to be better at things and to be more innovative than other communities. And if we take the brain power that we have at some of those institutions and work collaboratively together, I feel like we're positioned for more growth, and Jobs Ohio has been right at the middle of all of those opportunities. So from my perspective, it's about, I think that they've been very active in our community in supporting, driving investment, driving follow-on business investment, and making early stage, contributions in areas like the partnership I just mentioned that I think will bear fruit for a long time.
I know
Marty, here's that word collaborative again.
But I want to make certain that Secretary LaRose has a chance to speak before he has to run away.
Right.
Thank you, Ned. No, you're right. And there's that word collaborative again. And I appreciate that keeps coming up. I think that's one of the big takeaways here is that we've got a lot more in common than we have that differentiates us from one another. I think that my business, the business of government and politics, tends to focus on where the differences are too much now. But we have a lot more in common, especially as Northeast Ohioans, and we need to work together towards common goals, such as a revitalized economy and population growth, and some of those things that we know really do make a difference. I am going to sign off, Michelle, if that's all right. I do just again that reminder that remember, I'm the guy that runs elections for Ohio, so it's election season. Make sure that you vote, and voteohio.gov is the place to get all your information about how to do so. So thanks, everybody. See you soon.
Thank you. So then, Ned, you seemed like you wanted to jump in on that Jobs Ohio question.
Yeah, thank you so much. I want to point out that Jobs Ohio has responded to Governor DeWine's challenge to have the organization pay attention to, I call them courthouse square towns before, kind of those important mid-sized communities that used to be, identified with one particular company. And they realize that it's a lot of it is real estate investment that's going to make a difference, and clearing out some of the old stuff. I think when Jobs Ohio first started, they were pretty militant about not investing in speculative commercial space. But now that we pretty much run out of inventory, that attitude has changed inside Jobs Ohio. But I also think that they now realize that to have some of these smaller communities come back, they're going to have to do what Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Columbus did over the past 20 years, which is deal with some of their real problems. Jim Rackakis and the Thriving Communities Institute and the work they've done on spreading land banks across the state have made a big difference. But Jobs Ohio is the wallet. We need them.
Sarah, if I might very quickly.
Yes, of course.
We were very fortunate this morning at our business roundtable hosting the secretary to have Bob Smith as a part of our discussion. Bob chairs Jobs Ohio. And one of the things that we talked about was from a workforce development standpoint, the newly created Ohio to Work initiative, which I think is an excellent model for bridging the workforce and skills gaps of businesses and aligning those opportunities with community colleges and their response to workforce development. The Lieutenant Governor's initiative, Tech Cred, I think is another policy type program that will hopefully address some of the critical needs, not just in urban areas, but throughout the footprint of Ohio. So I just wanted to share with you those 2 points that I think are in Job Ohio's favor.
William, I wonder during that conversation earlier today, if there were a few major themes that emerged, if you'd be open to sharing with us.
I'd be happy to. The major theme is that this administration gets it in terms of workforce development, the challenges and issues. They see Ohio as a model as a result of Deputy Secretary Graves's knowledge of what's happening here in Northeast Ohio. But the other resonating theme was the aspect of collaboration amongst the business community, that we have a common testimony, we have a common message that it's job creation, it's the talent pipeline. But one of the critical aspects is getting people towards those opportunities, and what programmatic aspects can we engage to get people into the pipeline, trained, so that every possible aspect of our community benefits. It was a great message this morning from a variegated segment of industries. And those were the common themes that we saw resonate in the discussion this morning.
I have another audience question here. Someone asked, are there any efforts being made to have Ohio become a right to work state? Ford recently announced 2 new plants will be built both in right to work states. Who wants to tackle that one?
The answer is no. The political costs would be too high. I mean, we've done work for years that show that right to work states grow 40 metro areas and right to work states grow at 40 basis points per year higher than right to work states. So there is a capital movement away from states like ours, but we're also seeing there is a difference in the quality of the labor with those states which have unions that invest in their workforce are seeing a positive response in terms of quality of labor. So the question is, I don't think we're going to move that institutional impediment. What we have to do is make certain that that we continue to work in partnership with unions to improve the productivity of their workforces.
As I recall, the decisions automakers are making, of course, also involve calculus around finding mega sites, which are hard to find in places like the Detroit area or the Cleveland area.
That's absolutely correct.
So, the secretary before he left said he refuses to accept this idea that we're going to keep losing population. So we've talked about some strategies for bringing people here or keeping people here, including working more with immigrants, focusing more on our student population. What else can we do strategically to start reversing the flow of population or accelerating gains where we are gaining?
Pray for more hurricanes.
That's pretty bleak.
But remember, I'm an economist, so if I find the dark lining of a dark cloud, I get paid twice.
That's really the only thing we can hang this on?
Well, I mean, just think about this shell cracker that's being built in Beaver County, Pennsylvania. The reason why that's being built is because of the instability of supply on the Gulf Coast right now, with those large plastic plants and crackers being having to be shut down with hurricanes. I think that if you look at the heat-seeking geyser diaspora of Florida, when they start seeing what their new insurance bills are going to look like when it comes from storm damage, the calculus is going to change.
I'd like to take a different approach. It's, for me, the value proposition of why Cleveland or why Northeast Ohio, and the branding aspect of it. I decided to move here from a right-to-work state, Virginia. Never been to Cleveland, but the opportunity that was presented to me was one that I could not refuse. But I say that because when I informed my colleagues and friends that we were moving here to Cleveland, they said, Cleveland? You mean the lake, the burning lake and what have you? And now we love it, but when they come visit with us, they now are asking, is there room here for us? So I think the value proposition at an early stage from K through 12, that there are opportunities for sustainable, livable wages, the cultural activities that are here. We need to brand that. We need to rebrand it so that 80% of the graduates of Tri-C stay here in our community. How do we scale that across the board?
Yeah, I think earlier in the conversation, Michelle, the Secretary of State was talking about we need to get our swagger back in some ways. Maybe my words, not his. I think in some ways we have as a community of Clevelanders. I know Destination Cleveland has done a good amount of work and a good amount of good work in this space. And, sort of invite your, friends to Cleveland. I think we've, in the last 5-6 years, we had the RNC, the Cavs work, I think had put a different view of Clevelanders' view of Cleveland, but I don't know that that's necessarily translated to business leaders at this point. And I think that there's, some work to be done in demonstrating confidence in the region from a business leader standpoint. And that goes a little bit to what Mr. Gary was talking about with the communications and marketing strategy around that work. I mean, I think there's opportunity for us to tell our story in a different way than we have within the business leader community and demonstrate that we are a good place to grow business. Notwithstanding some of the other challenges that we've mentioned, but we're one of the biggest manufacturing communities in the country, and to have that legacy is strong to the extent we can make those folks innovative through some of the work that Magnet and others are doing. We've got a lot of potential, and so from my vantage point, I like Ned's comments, but I still think that there's opportunities for us that that we can control to grow Cleveland in a positive way, focusing on some of what we have and making it a little bit more innovative.
Hey, Northeast Ohio and Cleveland is no longer as defensive as it was when I first showed up in 1985. And I think the region has matured to the point and invested in the point and changed the region. So the conversation should no longer be about what you don't have, but the conversation is about what you do have, and what and make it an opportunity conversation. It's focusing on strengths rather than weaknesses, while shoring up the weaknesses you can shore up. That's how you do it. I moved from Lakewood to Columbus, and I traded Lake Erie for the Olentangy River. That was not a good trade. There are I get a paycheck, so that's a good thing. But the fact is that there are, if you're talking about a region that takes being a multicultural community seriously, that's where Northeast Ohio is. It's not, hasn't solved it, but the conversation's everywhere and it's meaningful, and the employers are part of it. If you're talking about access to quality of life, no region will win on quality of life, because quality of life is great all over the United States. But when you talk about specific aspects of opportunity and the quality of K through 12 education, we know there's a problem with specific school systems, but across Northeast Ohio, it's some of the best in the country. So I think it's, you know, Marty's right. Flip the switch, flip the script, sorry. Talking about positive without being Pollyanna. That's the other side of it. It's got to be
And
honest.
you mentioned some unique advantages or opportunities we have to market ourselves. There was a question about, you know, what our unique advantages are that set us apart. And I know that there are things from a business perspective we're focusing on, including the emphasis on access to fresh water for businesses. Marty, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it comes a little bit out of the work we've mentioned a little bit on the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, but the quality of Lake Erie is important when you look at businesses that need water. I mean, we see the national water challenges around just water access generally, either for residents or businesses, and we don't have that per se in Cleveland. And so, you know, capitalizing on that has been key. You know, there are a number of businesses that are directly related to the lake and growing that. You know, as I talked a little bit about innovation, also having, you know, folks like the Cleveland Water Alliance in that space that's helping take, you know, the several hundred of water related businesses and helping them become more innovative and get into different opportunities is key. So I think, you know, over time, that's definitely a growth opportunity for our community. We already have some, but I think there's a potential to have a lot more. And the Cleveland Water Alliance can in part help with some of that work. Maintaining the quality of our lake can help with that work. But we're really well positioned for, you know, the next several decades from a water standpoint. And not a lot of communities can say that.
And then we've got a question here about how we can get site selectors to focus more on Ohio. Does anybody have suggestions on that front?
My perspective is Ohio and Northeast Ohio in particular has been doing a very good job of getting site selectors in. FAM tours, the familiarization tours, take place constantly. Site Selection Magazine consistently has the state of Ohio as 1 through 4 in terms of states. The top rankings of Site Selection Magazine's mid-sized or small micropolitan areas is dominated by communities that start up around Sandusky and move down to Worcester. So the site selectors know us. The real question is how do we keep up to date to what the site selectors' customers are putting at the top of their search lists? And that's really important.
Marty, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I don't want to. Working with site selectors is key, and attracting businesses to our region is really important. We found that GCP is growing and focusing on what is here and helping them grow and become more innovative. Has as good, if not much better, arguably, ROI. So, I mean, again, we've got a strong manufacturing base. We've got water-related companies helping the folks that are here grow incrementally and then grow larger over time. Again, not to devalue site selection. I think it plays a key role in a comprehensive economic development strategy, but we've really been focused on, you know, supporting the businesses that are here, expanding the businesses that are here, breaking into new product lines, breaking into new opportunities. And that's a big focus. You know, I know a lot of folks are organized around site selection and applaud that. I just think, you know, we've been a little bit more focused on growing what's here.
And Michelle, the third leg of this, it's kind of, I sometimes call it Jerry Garcia economics. You got to grow your own. And most people who are paying attention are probably as old as I am, so they'll get it. But the point is that in the 1980s, we did not have a strong entrepreneurial culture in Northeast Ohio. And that landscape has changed drastically with the success of Jumpstart. And the networks of entrepreneurs that are showing up. We're now seeing businesses that were starting here that have gotten, that have essentially been able to raise capital in the standard capital markets. And the other thing is that this is the region has done it so people have to make the business case around their products. We've lost some through buyouts, some don't make it. That's part of entrepreneurship. But I think that it is a combination of retention with startup that's really important. And to me, the importance of site selection is, yeah, you may get a huge win, and that's been going in the distribution district, but that's how you benchmark yourself to make certain that we're competitive with other regions, which is paying attention to what the site selectors are paying to. Because if you're competitive for the site selectors, you're competitive for your own economic base.
Well, to Ned's point with Jumpstart, I mean, the state of Ohio did something big 15 years ago, and they started the Third Frontier Initiative. It has evolved over time, but having sort of entrepreneurial services and real access to capital provided by an offshoot of the state, enforcing collaboration, is really been positive for our community, and figuring out what the next iteration of the Third Frontier is as they dwindle down their money from prior bond issuances, is going to be important. So, we've got the right building blocks in place. Some of them need to be worked through. Some of them need nurturing, mature, evolve, but we've got a lot of the right building blocks to address, I think what started with the core challenge here is just addressing population growth, but I think there's a lot of opportunity.
I think that's probably a good place for me to close it out and to send it back to Amy to wrap things up. So I just want to thank the three of you for participating in this conversation.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much to the panelists. I think this was such an amazing and informative discussion, and we truly appreciate everyone's time. And thank you very much. I can speak for the committee and everybody in NAP. I think this was a fantastic program. So thank you again, and look forward to upcoming events with NAP. So keep your eye out for any emails coming for next events that we have on the calendar. But thank you again, Michelle and the panelists. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye-bye all.
Thanks. Bye.